Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming to the webinar this evening to hear Neil Mintrel speak. It's definitely an honor to present Neil, not only because he's a fantastic photographer, but also because he's one of my former professors from grad school. So Neil, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And just a little bit about Neil. He's worked for a variety of different publications, such as uh, the New York Times and the Christian Science Monitor. He was the editor there for quite a while. And a lot of his work is based around photojournalism and documentary work. So with that being said, Neil, I'll pass everything over to you.
Okay, thank you. Uh, excuse me. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to be online with you. And I'm going to give you a real brief background. Myself, Melanie gave one, but let me just tell you a little bit about myself. Uh, I didn't start out as a
Neil, can
photographer.
you
I
hold
started,
on 1 second? We're
sure,
getting some notes in here saying that they can't hear stuff. Could you
okay.
guys just respond? If you can hear both of us speaking, would you respond in the text chat? Just a couple of people. Okay. So it sounds like a couple of people might have their speakers turned down. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Neil. Go ahead
That's
and
okay.
start back again. Okay.
Sure, just a real quick background. I started out as a teacher, not as a photographer. But I was brought up in a family where art was appreciated of all sorts. And I was also brought up with a real sense of awe about the world around me and a real strong sense of curiosity. Studs Terkel said, curiosity never killed this cat. And I sort of line up with that. And I started to travel a bit in my early 20s. I went to Ireland, which was a real eye opener for me. And I moved to Alaska, and I did a lot of travel and sort of adventure type, mostly snapshots. And I got really interested in the darkroom process. I took a course at Syracuse University, which taught me, it was supposed to be a documentary course, but basically what it did is taught me how to print. And then at a certain point in there, I became sort of politicized. There was a lot of politics going on in the world then, Vietnam War and everything. And in particular, what happened was that I saw images that really helped or really were instrumental in changing U.S. policy, and I'm sure you're all familiar with them. And things like, I don't know, Kent State and, different images that came out of the Vietnam War, My Lai Massacre. And so I got very interested in journalism and ended up working for the Anchorage Daily News because somebody gave me a break, basically. And that really taught me a lot, doing 3 or 4 assignments a day, uh, always under deadline, always under pressure, a lot of room for failure. You always had 30 or 40 blank pages the next day if you made a mistake or if you didn't get what you needed to get. And so it was a great, terrific learning experience. And it was really sort of the heyday of journalism and photojournalism also. I was really lucky in that regards. And then from there, after 3 or 4 years at the Daily News, I've ended up freelancing for about 10 years. And I worked for a variety of magazines and publications and newspapers. And I also moved to the Boston area, which introduced me to the Christian Science Monitor. So I freelanced in Boston for, like I say, for about 8 or 10 years, doing some commercial work, a lot of editorial work. And then when I went to work for the Monitor was really amazing because they had bureaus, still do, not to the extent that they had. Of course, everybody's cutting back, but they had bureaus all over the world. And as photographers, that was that was a great gig because you got to travel to all these different bureaus and cover different events and things like that. And so then at a certain point while I was working at the Monitor, I became the picture editor. Their department was in, photo department was in somewhat disarray, and their chief photographer quit, and they were looking for direction and new direction. And I sort of volunteered and was asked and sort of volunteered for the job and became the director of photography and the picture editor. And it still allowed me to travel somewhat, but I spent a lot of time behind the desk looking at thousands of pictures every week and choosing them for the newspaper. So with that, I think maybe what I should do is to show you some of the work that I've done and some of the examples. I'll talk a little bit about it. Most of these are grouped. I just picked out a bunch and put them in groups. And so I'll go through each group and tell you a little bit about each one. All right. So if everybody can see the screen, I assume they can. Melanie, is that right? So we're ready to roll. Melanie, are you there, or Mary? I can't tell if anybody can hear me or not.
I'm here, Neil. We can hear you just fine. I just had my.
Okay. All right. All right.
No, we can hear you okay.
Okay. Thanks. And my screen is up.
Yep, your screen is showing perfect.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we'll start with a photograph of Chico Mendes, who is an activist, rubber tapper activist in Brazil, who was instrumental in dealing with cattle companies and different people cutting down the Brazilian rainforest. He was actually assassinated about a month after this picture was taken. But I traveled there, spent a couple of weeks with him, and photographed he and his family, and traveled around in different parts of the Brazilian, the Amazon, basically in the rainforest. This is his cousin, lives in a very remote village. His son. More pictures from the same situation. Families. Education. A school for adult women. And then I'm try to break this up a little bit so we don't look all from the same region all the time. This is a piece I did on a company that made dog food with horse meat. After loading up a truck, and the three guys who worked there, they're all brothers. I also traveled quite a bit in the Mideast and North Africa, Egypt. This photographs from Egypt. Prayers, Muslim temple. I also traveled in Asia. This is a series on small micro businesses and loans in India and Bangladesh. Grassroots financing, basically. These women were part of the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. They were given microloans. Not all stories worked out really well. At a certain point, I decided to do a story on hobos, and so a friend of mine, a writer friend of mine, and I, we hopped freights for a month and a half, and I actually got sort of a leave of absence to do this. And we spent a month and a half Pacific Northwest riding on freights and meeting hobos and talking to people. And the end of the story is that just as we were finishing the photography and the interviewing and the writing and everything, this wonderful book came out called Riding the Rails. And so that was the end of that. This is Johannesburg. More from Bangladesh. More. I always look for details. I like to get tight, to get close, get intimate. I've covered events here in the United States, protest, Al Sharpton at a protest, part of that same protest. I spent a couple of weeks at the Rosebud Indian Reservation a Native American reservation in Wounded Knee, North Dakota. Kids leaving a convenience store. They actually ride their horses to the store just like we drive a car or skateboard or whatever. They ride their horses to the convenience store. Wounded Knee is 7 miles from the Nebraska border. Wounded Knee is dry, so everybody drives that 7, or actually it's 11 miles to the border. Old church in Wounded Knee. Peter Catches, he's a shaman. I spent a lot of time with him. He did not initially want to have his photograph taken. Finally, he looked at me and he said, "Well, I suppose so." He looked up and he had this light filtering down on his face. And I thought, he looks like a shaman. In the school, boarding school for kids there in Wounded Knee. Whoop. And a pool hall near there. I covered a lot of what took place in Eastern Europe and East Germany. This was in Czechoslovakia at Wenceslas Square during some demonstrations. This was the first heavy metal rock concert in Czechoslovakia. It was in Prague. It was raining like mad. There were sparks flying out of the stage and everything. And these groups were from mostly Eastern Europe, a couple from Ireland, Northern Ireland. But nobody walked off the stage. They just kept playing right in the middle of the storm. This is part of a demonstration in Poland. Lech Walesa in Poland. It was a treat covering emerging politics in many parts of the world, including Eastern Europe, because everything was so accessible. And he came out of a meeting, and I was with a reporter from the New York Times and the Monitor, and where are you going? Well, I'm speaking at a demonstration. I got to go. And he said, "If you want to go, jump in." So we sort of jumped in his Volkswagen van, and off we went. And that's the way covering politics in that part of the world in that era was. It was terrific. Leipzig. I also covered Mandela getting out of prison in South Africa. Went to a lot of demonstrations, spent a lot of time in squatter camps and whatnot. This is from a demonstration waiting for Mandela to arrive. This was at another demonstration. No, this was a communist organization. They had a demonstration. While I was there, I spent time in some refugee camps. More demonstration. More of the same. At one point, I covered a demonstration in a soccer field in a real remote sort of a squatter camp called Orange Camp. And I followed the marchers all through the town, and it dissipated, and there I was standing there by myself. And this woman in a white dress came up, and she gave me this freedom signal, which says "Amanja," and then she looked at me very seriously and got very close to my face and said to me, she said, "You shouldn't be here." And I didn't feel particularly threatened, and she said, "You come with me." So I went with her, and I ended up spending the day with her. And then she passed me off to an uncle. She's sort of my guardian angel while I was in this town. She took me to a lot of meetings and parties and celebrations and goings on. It's a school in a converted hog farm. School children. ANC march. Another school. Johannesburg. Johannesburg was and is a really hard place to work. It's not particularly safe. I got mugged. There's another school. There's a kindergarten. This is sitting on blocks. It's a ANC rally. I have no idea how many people there. A couple 100,000 people, all waiting for Mandela to speak. Squatter camps. So you had time covering events, and in between the events, you would sort of wander, look for stuff, which is my favorite thing to do. I call it gold panning, or panning for gold. Desmond Tutu, Zulu warriors, one of the squatter camps. Mandela coming back from Zimbabwe, or not Zimbabwe, from Zambia. Yasser Arafat was there to meet him on the right. Winnie is behind him. A lot of poverty, a lot of issues, a lot of alcoholism. I also covered the first elections, free elections, when Marcos left power in the Philippines with Corazon Aquino. This is her in a rally. First free ballot. That's a ballot box the guy's carrying. Because we won't get fooled again. I also did a series in the United States called Poor and Black in America. We went to 4 or 5 different cities and photographed groups of people, interviewed people, ended up into being a 5-part series. This is Atlanta, Los Angeles. Whoops, that's not supposed to be there. That's Korea. Sorry. And also did a series, one of the most recent work, which was still not quite completed. It's a series I'm working on continuously, actually, from West Virginia. And this is North Fork, West Virginia. And my daughter is a writer and a radio producer. And so she worked on and is working on the project with me. And that's her with one of our subjects, one of our main subjects, actually, Melvin Wine. That's another one of me. That's actually me with one of our other main subjects, Mr. T. So I spent a lot of time there, going to festivals, and it originally started out as a project looking at roots music, Appalachian, old-time Appalachian mountain music. And then it became more about West Virginia in general and certain things that define it, like music, religion, resources, family. So we started looking at all these various themes that sort of define West Virginia. Resources, agriculture, and family. Family reunion. Singing gospel songs before they start to eat. Good food, lots of butter. It's a home of one of our main subjects. That's Melvin Wine. He's a fiddle player. He was in the first picture with my daughter. Spent a lot of time in coal mines, looking at what happens in these small little coal mines. This one is called low coal. That's as high as it gets. So you're on your hands and knees for about 12 hours. That's the owner of the mine. Actual miner cutting through coal. The owner of the mine at home after a day's work. That's the owner of the mine with 2 of his sons and 1 of his workers. This is sort of the guy who got us started. We stopped and talked to him, and he sort of pointed us in the right direction. His job is to guard mines at night. That's a mine entrance in the background. And that's how you get through the mine on a thing called a truck. You have to lay down on it to get through. It's back in the mountain about 1.5 miles. There's the truck coming out of the mine. At the end of the day, repairing a machine inside the mine. The end of the day, hard, hard, hard work. $18 an hour. This is one of the coal towns hired by the workers hired by the coal company to keep the sidewalks free of coal dust. Coal train. They run about every half hour. 50% of the electricity in the United States comes from coal. So mines are, in this county that we're in, the unemployment was 40%, McDowell County, but still, it's because it's so mechanized, they use fewer workers, so there's a lot of unemployment. And then there's just sort of the serendipity driving along the road and seeing two ladies with weed whackers in front of a Peterbilt truck. Still West Virginia Music Festival, musician. Spent time with a guy by the name of Bo King. Bo farms with a horse, grows most of his own food. It's his wife and his son. And spent time with a guy who's a logger. That's he and his family. This is part of his log camp. He's also a minister. He plays the banjo in church, and this is the church that he preaches in. And there he is in his logging machine. There's another subject named Mr. T. He lives in the house behind him there with about 8 different people. He's the only one with a steady job and money, and he takes in cousins and nephews and whatnot and live with them. He just killed a rattlesnake. I got there too late for him to actually kill it. That's his front porch. Some of the kids that live there. He's also one of the few people around that has a pickup truck, so he's always in demand. The black cat. It's a nephew and a niece. His nephew. That's a cousin and a grandson at a football game. This is another woman we spent time with. She was abused. Her son. That's her daughter after church being preached to in the parking lot. The daughter in a little inflatable swimming pool. One of our subjects. People hanging out, drinking, playing music. That's Bo. He lives in a town called Shock, S-H-O-C-K. I always wanted a mail postcard from Shock that said, "I'm in shock." There's Bo in his house, getting ready to go to work. That's his wife, Robin, after putting the horses away, washing up in a horse trough. It's his daughter and his son asleep. In front of his house. That's his wife crocheting a blanket for her child, for her infant child. Nobody has locks on the door. It's kind of interesting. If you look at the door beside her, there's no doorknob. It's just a rope through a hole. That's Bo's wife, Robin, bathing the child. local resident, neighbor. The mayor of North Fork. These guys I hooked up with just by chance. This is a serendipitous sort of thing. They were moss pickers. They went out and they picked moss off of stumps and logs and rocks and things like that. And they sell it to casket manufacturers and they use it for padding in caskets. They make a living at it. There they are out in the woods, dodging copperheads and picking moss. We found 3 copperheads. If you're lucky, you find ginseng, which brings $500–600 an ounce dried. If I complete the project, that'll be the last photograph there. There they are at the end of the day. This was in Alaska, on an island. This man's 70, he's about 75 years old there, and he spent maybe a week off of the island that he was raised on. That's it. So what I've been doing now, I do less assignments, and I've started doing projects with street photography. And that's, I'll whip through these fairly fast. One of the things that I like to do is street photography. And so I spend a lot of time on the street looking for sort of the ironies, the paradoxes, sort of iconic paradoxes, incongruities. And this is just a quick series I'll go through. So I never go anywhere without a camera. And anything is fair game, regardless of what I made. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes I just stumble on stuff. And this happened to be at the Bonneville Salt Flats. Nevada. I'm always looking for, things that are sort of out of place, don't quite fit in. Regardless where I am, what I'm doing, there's always photographs. San Francisco. Pictures are everywhere, you know. Elliot Erwitt says, notice. That's all, just notice. New York, Portland, Maine. Probably recognize that one. Old ripped off postings on a telephone pole. Fenway Park. It's hard to do this sort of thing with other people. They don't want to stop ever, you know. You just have to walk, 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 walk. Look at stuff that's interesting. You know, all these people are strangers, and I talk to a lot of them. Yeah, you can find it everywhere. It doesn't even necessarily have to be people. That's it. Okay. Uh, I guess it's time to take some questions. Hello? If I can answer anything.
Hi, Neil. Sorry, I don't know why. I think
Okay, there we
Melanie's going to
go.
be answering
So,
the
Neil,
questions. Okay, great.
Okay, hi.
I just, yeah, I just unmuted myself. So we've had a stream of questions come in, and I think the most popular question for you is how you decide to shoot either black and white images or color images, or do you shoot color and then convert to black and white, or what's your process on that?
Well, I shoot color and convert to black and white. The fact is this, is that well, I mean, that's not a fact, but my personal opinion is that you can do anything in black and white, or you can do anything in color that you can do in black and white and vice versa. Black and white is a bit of an abstraction, and I sort of pick black and white depending on what the project is. And I've never done a project on people on death row, but if I was going to, I would probably pick black and white because I think it's an appropriate subject. The West Virginia project, interestingly enough, I started out shooting color, and I decided it would be exclusively in color. But I found that the ambiance and the mood of West Virginia was very fitting to black and white. And so I started shooting black and white. Initially, actually, I started shooting film, and then I converted to digital, and I use Silver Effects Pro and convert it. Uh, but I think, black and white being an abstraction, I think it fits certain subjects better than others. And I think it just depends on the subject matter, totally on the subject matter.
Yeah. Do you still shoot film?
I don't shoot film anymore. I have a bunch of lots of film cameras. They're probably make good canoe anchors. There isn't much of a demand for them, nor is there much of a demand for film. As an artist, sure. I just went to an exhibit of photographs in San Francisco, and they were contact prints, 40 by 60 inches. You know, speaking of film, they're made in a camera obscura, but as far except for fine art, I don't see anybody shooting film really.
Yeah. And this is a question from Antonia. How would you recommend one to approach a career in photojournalism?
Mm. Well, it is definitely not the heyday of photojournalism. I don't want to say anything to discourage anybody, because if you're absolutely obsessed with it and passionate about it, then there's definitely a career there out there waiting for you. Uh, if you look at job sites like the National Press Photography Association, things like that, jobs do come up. There's a job right now in Lawrence, Massachusetts, if you wanted to work for a newspaper. And but most of the jobs that you see out there now, the requirements are that they want you to shoot video as well as stills. They want you to be able to edit video also. And so it's a little more technically involved. And uh, one of the things to do, I would guess, my sense is that would be to just shoot up a storm and then talk to agencies, people like Corbis and Getty and Tandem Stock, some of those agencies that actually do give assignments, Aurora on occasion, uh, and see if you can get at least a part-time gig. You're going to end up making a lot less money in the beginning than you might normally in some sort of a startup job. You may end up speculating, which is not a good thing to do if you want to make money at it. But it's the matter of getting your foot in the door and getting respect. Once people see your images, once they see that you're really committed to it and you're passionate and obsessive about it, you'll start to see people giving you breaks and opportunities, and kind of gain their trust, and then speculation may turn into assignments, and I think that's probably, at this point, it's the best way to go. In school, in education, there's a lot of schools not quite the way it used to be, but it used to be like University of Missouri and Ohio. Uh, you know, you came out of those with a graduate degree. It was like coming out of Harvard Business School and getting a job at a bank. It was sort of guaranteed. It's not quite so much like that anymore, but there are such really good schools out there, and they definitely give you credentials.
This is a question from Mandy on a slightly different topic.
Hmm.
Have you ever done any work for National Geographic?
No, I have not. It's interesting to ask. I've interviewed with them, and God, they were really nice and really helpful and everything. I have worked for, there's a German magazine, the equivalent to National Geographic, called Geo magazine, and I've done stuff for Geo, and they're great. They're a little more esoteric. They're a little bit more open on their style, and as a freelancer, one of the things about a freelancer I'll mention is that you kind of learn what style, what publication uses what style. I mean, Newsweek or Time Magazine, let's say, uses a completely different style than, say, New York Times. And so as a freelancer, you shoot for a lot of different publications to sort of match the style of the publication. Then occasionally you get publications like Geo, for instance, which has a real broad spectrum in terms of vision. And it's a real treat to shoot for something like that. But no, I've never shot for National Geographic.
Thank you. This is a question from Kimberly. Do you have a favorite area of the world that you have traveled to before?
Hmm. Sure, I would say it's probably India. You know,
Mhm.
India and that whole locale uh, is a really terrific place. Uh, Ireland, not necessarily for its but news value, but Ireland is visually is just a terrific place. And I got to say, I've never been anywhere as diverse as the United States. I mean, there are parts of the United States that are just like, the Shinjuku section of Tokyo, and there's other parts of the United States that's just, you might as well be in a developing country. I mean, it's this huge, broad spectrum, and so yeah, I love traveling and working in the United States for sure. New York is awesome, and rural America is really amazing too. West Virginia, places like that, Georgia.
Mhm. And these are two questions that are semi-related. One is from Natasha and one is from Mr. Jordell. Um, have you ever felt like you've been in a dangerous situation when you've been in the field or felt any animosity while photographing riots or in refugee camps?
No, actually, my experience is this. First of all, if your intentions are good, and and people are pretty instinctive, and they know why you're there. They know whether or not they're being intentionally exploited for some reason, and if you are forthright, look people in the eye, are kind, and um, when I travel, like in the West Virginia project, I probably gave away 300 or 400 photographs to people because it was a repeat process. I'd be gone a month and I'd come back. And even travel at one point, I used to travel with a small portable printer and I'd make up prints at night and hand them to the subjects the next day. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times, especially if you're dealing with corrupt governments or in conflicts, like I covered stuff in South Africa and different places where I've been, Mozambique, where there's definitely a certain, risk and a certain danger and everything. I've been mugged a couple of times, 3 times,
Hmm.
and but is it felt never really felt like, maybe you would get hit with a stray bullet or something like that, but I don't think anybody, in terms of people that I work closely with, I never felt like, okay, we're going to get this guy. I never felt that way.
Yeah.
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 Other than random muggings. Yeah.
Okay. Um, what is the most life-changing photo shoot you've ever been a part of? That's a question from Tara.
Huh. Good question. I would say that what life-changing photo situation. Uh, I guess I would say it would have to be um, two. One was a trip to Ireland I took when I was very, very young, and I was introduced to a world which was very unlike the United States at that time. People in Connemara County were living in, thatched roof, mud floored, dirt floored huts. And I didn't realize there was a whole other part of the world. And all of a sudden, I became really on fire with the idea like, okay, there's so much more of the world than I was ever aware of. I want to get it on film. That would be one. The other one was the Philippine elections, which was, a basically non-violent election. I mean, it was a democratic process, and it was conducted by a group of people that had amazing um, optimism in the face of terrific odds. And I found that really inspiring, and it set me on a course where I really wanted to tell uh, people's story. I wanted to talk to people who those who had no voice, basically. You know. So that was a really important trip for me.
Yeah. Would you say that you bring a lot of equipment with you when you go out into the field? It's a question from
No, I
Sharon.
really, I really travel light. I mean, when I first started out, zoom lenses were really not much good. So you always carried, most people carried a couple of cameras, one with a sort of a telephoto and the other with a wide angle. Zooms have gotten so good, and with digital not having to switch film all the time, that I've started to travel and with just one camera, and I use a zoom, and I've got a couple of really good wide to short telephoto zooms that work really well. And I always carry two backup cameras, and I usually carry them, and I just keep them in my luggage. And but yeah, I just use one camera in the field, unless it's a specific event. If I'm covering a sporting event and I know I'm going to need a broader range of focal lengths, then I'll carry two cameras so I don't have to keep switching back and forth.
Hmm.
The other thing is that has made this possible is that the sensors and digital cameras have become so good that you can use some real wide-ranging zooms that don't have a particularly large lens opening, but still, you can up the ISO and still get great shots.
Right, right. And a question from Joe. How long do you feel that it takes you to feel comfortable with your subject or for them to feel comfortable with you?
Mm, somewhere between 5 seconds and a minute. Uh, you know, I mean, you'd have to know me, but I have a very easygoing personality, and I'm very comfortable with strangers. And like I say, people can tell, and the other thing is you have to be willing, people are opening up their lives to their story. So I think one of my tactics is that I open up my life to other people, and I can establish rapport very, very quickly. So it doesn't take long. I mean, in certain situations, you don't have time. Having said that, you may always be an outsider, and there's a huge difference between outsider and insider photography, and definitely it's the insider look that gets you in the door and gets you greater access. And, I've done jobs where uh, I wouldn't even bring my camera for the first week, or I'd always bring my cameras, usually bring my camera, but I wouldn't take photographs for the first week. So, at first, if you show up, if you don't know people, you have to explain why you're there. If you bring a camera and you know people, all you have to do then is explain why you bring the camera. So if you show up for a project or a group of people or whatever, and you're going to make a long-term project out of it, try and be more of an insider, then you show up, with a camera, you talk to people, you explain what they're doing, you make them part of the collaboration. And so that in a certain period of time, when you actually start taking photographs, they know why you're there and why you brought the camera. And it makes the job much easier.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that.
And at the same, I'll add to that, at the same time, I've walked up to people and say, hey, I'm working on a project. I'm a photojournalist. And they look at me and they sort of go into documentary mode. You don't have to say anything to them. They're like, oh, okay, I'm going to ignore you without anything being said. It's a pretty amazing. Sometimes people are quite savvy about that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. A question from Summer. How does your family handle you traveling all over the world
Well,
when you're away?
if you talk to most newspaper people, photojournalists, I hate to say it, but most of them have been divorced, and those who aren't are usually married to other journalists. And I married a journalist, and she was very understanding. That was just part of the deal. And I never traveled for more than 5 weeks at a time. Uh, when I was at the Monitor, I was traveling 5, 6 months at the time, which ultimately actually led me to leave the Monitor because I was missing the experience of watching my children grow up, and I decided that was not a sacrifice I was going to make.
Yeah, yeah. And a question for Melissa, going back to, dealing with subjects and photographing them. Have you ever felt nervous about shooting people, even when you are comfortable with them?
Nope, not really.
No.
I'll tell you, when you get behind this is a cheating or the chicken way out, but I find that once I'm behind the camera, uh, then it's you could almost say you're hiding behind it in a sense. I mean, you're behind the camera. It's your job, and like I say, people are pretty savvy. They know you're there, and people. The reality is that most of the time, people are flattered for having a picture taken. People are flattered that somebody is interested in them, taking their lives, giving them a voice. It's not very often where I've been confronted. Uh, I remember one time I was in Hooper Bay. You people, all you do is take, take, take. You never give back.
Mm.
And I remember her saying that, and the reality was she was talking about anthropologists. Hooper Bay had been studied to death by anthropologists, but she sort of lumped them all together. But she was right, that there is a certain aspect of what you do is taking. You take a photograph, and as such, I really do feel also, depending on the situation, you do have a responsibility to give back. That's why if I'm working on any kind of a project that's long term, I'll take photographs back. The other thing I do is I'll hand out business cards, and I'll say to people, if you want a photograph, then email me and give me a reminder of who you were and so on, and I'll email you a photograph. I never, if you say to somebody, okay, I'll send you a photograph, give me your email address, you'll spend all your time printing, photographs to send out to people, getting done. But nervous? Nah, not really. I'm nervous sometimes that I'm going to get the shot, that I'm going to satisfy, the publisher or whatever, or thinking that, wow, this is an event that's never going to repeat itself. I better get it right the first time. That makes me nervous sometimes. Makes me a little
Yeah.
more attentive. Yeah.
Do you ever get releases for some of your subjects?
Yeah, in certain situations, like the West Virginia project, I got releases, but for the most part, no. And of course, if you work for a newspaper, you don't need releases. I mean, if you work for a newspaper or a magazine, you don't really, it's editorial use, and you don't really need releases. So uh, most of the time, not. Sometimes, yes. Yeah.
Hmm.
That's a subject that everybody wants to talk about, and you could talk about it for hours about when a release is required and so on and so forth. And there's a ton of great stuff out there that has been written about it that's very authoritative and pretty easy to read, actually. Uh, but releases are a sticky subject with my students also. They always want to know, like, when don't I, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And a question for somebody who is applying for a photojournalist position tomorrow, actually.
great.
Do you have any advice for him in his resume or cover letter?
Hmm. Well, it sort of depends on their experience, but I, to be very honest, there are so many out of work newspaper photographers out there right now that the competition's pretty tough. Uh, Having said that, you'd be better if you're actually interviewing for what they say, a newspaper job?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
In South Carolina, a
okay.
small town newspaper.
What is it called?
He says it's a local paper in his small town in North Carolina.
Okay. Small papers, I'm not sure, but I'm going to say this, that most papers, they're run by word people. They are, I might hear about this, but they usually have pretty strong egos. They're pretty brash. That's how they got there. And it's a fast-paced, competitive environment. So I think certainly my resume would reflect a willingness to work 16-hour days.
Hmm.
And I think in an interview, I would do everything I could to come off with assuredness, confidence, and maybe a little bit of uh, slightly brash, maybe something that's gonna stand out, take notice. Like, I'm your guy, and I understand what this business is about.
Right, right. Well, great. Well, thank you, Neil.
You're
There
welcome.
are plenty of questions, but we are getting towards the end of the webinar. And if you don't mind, will students be able to contact you if they have further
Sure.
thoughts?
Yes.
Great, great. So if anybody would like to contact Neil, please feel free to go to his website. His email is there. And if you can't find it, you can always refer to my first year's Focus and Fire blog, and there's a post about the lecture this evening. So you can contact Neil that way as well. So Neil, thank you again so much for coming and speaking to our students and faculty members. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Great.
Okay. All right.
All right, great. Well, everybody enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.